The divorce papers hit the marble kitchen island with a sharp slap. My husband stood there, his arm wrapped around his 26-year-old assistant, proudly announcing she was pregnant. He gave me 48 hours to pack my life into boxes and leave my own home. I looked at the papers, looked at her smug smile, and calmly picked up a pen. Empty houses tell no lies, and my husband had no idea I held the deed to his entire reality. I am Allison, 33 years old, and until that evening, I thought I was celebrating my 5th wedding anniversary. If you have ever smiled in the face of absolute betrayal because you knew you held the winning hand, hit that like button. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and subscribe to hear how a boring bookkeeper dismantled a wealthy narcissist's life in exactly 48 hours. The evening was supposed to be a celebration. I had spent hours preparing an elaborate roast, setting the dining room table with our fine wedding china, and waiting for Spencer to walk through the front door. Spencer is 36, a high-profile wealth manager who wears bespoke suits and treats every human interaction like a ruthless boardroom negotiation. When the front door finally unlocked, he did not walk in with anniversary flowers or an apology for being late. He walked in with Madison. Madison was his administrative assistant. She was a decade younger than him, wearing a designer coat I instantly recognized from Spencer's credit card statements. He had claimed it was a corporate gift for an important client when I saw the charge 3 months ago. Spencer did not even offer a greeting. He simply marched right into the kitchen, pulled a thick manila envelope from his leather briefcase, and tossed it onto the center of our custom marble island. The sound echoed in the quiet house, sharp and incredibly final. "Sign them, Allison," he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion or guilt. "I am not doing this dance anymore. Madison is moving in. She is pregnant and she needs a calm, stress-free environment. You have exactly 48 hours to pack whatever fits in your car and leave." I stood there, a dish towel still clutched in my hand, staring at the man I had married 5 years ago. Spencer had always been a man who craved absolute control, especially financial control. Throughout our marriage, he managed all the visible wealth. He drove the luxury cars, wore the heavy gold watches, and constantly reminded our social circle that he was the primary breadwinner of the household. He loved to introduce me at corporate dinners as his sweet wife, who did some boring bookkeeping to pass the time. He never respected my actual profession. He thought I'd just balance simple spreadsheets for local bakeries. He completely ignored the fact that I am a forensic accountant. My daily job involves tracking down hidden assets, uncovering massive corporate fraud, and dismantling complex financial lies for high-net-worth clients. I literally destroy arrogant men for a living. Yet here he was, standing in my kitchen, ordering me out of my own space like a trespassing stranger. Madison stepped forward, running her hand along the edge of the marble island. She looked at me with a sickening mixture of pity and triumph. "Spencer has been paying for everything for years," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It is only fair you leave the house to us. The baby needs a stable home, and Spencer says you do not really own anything here anyway." I looked down at the divorce papers resting on the counter. Spencer had already signed his name with his typical aggressive flourish. He was demanding full possession of the residence, claiming he had been the sole provider of the lease payments. He was so incredibly confident, so utterly blind to the reality of the ground he was currently standing on. "Are you going to cry?" Spencer asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "Because I do not have the patience for your emotional outbursts tonight. Just sign the acknowledgement of service. I have already contacted the property management company to secure the lease entirely in my name. You are legally required to vacate by Sunday evening." I did not cry. I did not scream or throw the plates I had so carefully set on the dining table. I felt a cold, absolute calm wash over my entire body. The years of enduring his subtle financial abuse, his condescending remarks about my career, and his blatant narcissism all crystallized into this single moment of pure clarity. I reached into the kitchen drawer, pulled out my favorite black pen, and carefully signed my name on the designated line. I slid the papers back across the cold marble. 48 hours. I repeated, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any tears. "You want me out by Sunday night?" Yes, Spencer replied eagerly, grabbing the papers and slipping them back into his expensive leather briefcase. Take your clothes and whatever personal items you can manage to carry. Do not touch the furniture or the appliances. Madison really likes the aesthetic of this place, and I paid for the rent that keeps a roof over it. I smiled at him. It was a genuine, chilling smile that made him blink in momentary confusion. He was expecting a breakdown, a desperate plea for him to stay. He was not expecting a woman who had just been handed the perfect opportunity to execute a flawless financial extraction right under his nose without breaking a single law. I will take exactly what belongs to me, Spencer, I told him, looking directly into his eyes. You two should go enjoy your romantic weekend getaway. I will be gone by the time you both return. Just remember that you made this bed and you will sleep in it. Madison did not seem to grasp the warning hidden in my words. Instead, she wandered deeper into the open concept living room, her eyes scanning the space with greedy entitlement. She ran her fingers over the back of the custom Italian leather sofa I had waited 6 months to have imported. She paused by the vintage brass bar cart I sourced from an estate sale, trailing her manicured nails across the polished glass. I really love what you have done with the place, Madison said, not bothering to hide the smirk stretching across her face. The neutral tones are perfect. I was worried I would have to redecorate before the baby arrives, but this actually fits my aesthetic perfectly. So please do not bother packing any of the decor or the big furniture. You would just ruin the vibe, and frankly, we need it more than you do now. I watched her casually lay claim to my meticulously curated home. Every single item she touched had been purchased with my own money, carefully selected and paid for from an account Spencer never bothered to monitor. He was always too busy funneling his massive wealth management bonuses into luxury car leases and expensive weekend trips to pay attention to domestic expenses. In his arrogant mind, because he paid the monthly rent, he inherently owned everything inside the walls. Spencer walked over to Madison and wrapped his arm around her waist, kissing her temple, before turning his smug gaze back to me. "Let us get down to business, Allison," he said, his tone shifting into his aggressive corporate negotiating voice. "I know you think you are smart, but I am always one step ahead. Do not think about making this difficult or dragging this out in housing court. You have absolutely no legal right to be here past Sunday." I tilted my head, feigning mild confusion just to prompt his ego. "Really? And how exactly did you manage that, Spencer? We are both on the lease." His chest puffed out with sheer pride. He looked like a man who believed he had just pulled off the heist of the century. "We were on a month-to-month lease, Allison. Past tense. I contacted the property management company, Aegis Holdings LLC, last week. I officially terminated our joint month-to-month agreement. I then immediately signed a brand new exclusive long-term lease under my name alone. I paid the security deposit and the first month of rent up front. Aegis Holdings, LLC, has officially recognized me as the sole legal tenant of this property. You are now nothing but an unauthorized occupant, and if you do not vacate by Sunday evening, I will have the authorities remove you for trespassing." He practically beamed with self-satisfaction. He had used his financial leverage to legally trap me, or so he thought. He assumed that dealing with a faceless corporate landlord like Aegis Holdings, LLC, meant standard bureaucratic procedures. He assumed his high income and excellent credit score made him the ideal tenant, easily allowing him to overwrite my residency rights. "You really thought of everything," I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady. I must admit, contacting Aegis Holdings directly to secure an exclusive lease was an incredibly bold move. "I do not mess around when it comes to my family," Spencer replied, pulling Madison closer to his side. "Madison is carrying my child, and I'm going to provide her with the perfect environment. You are just a temporary roadblock. A minor bookkeeping error I am correcting. Now we have a flight to catch. We are spending the weekend in Aspen for our baby moon. When we return on Sunday night, I expect your clothes to be gone and your keys left on this kitchen island. Do we understand each other?" I looked around the beautiful kitchen, glancing at the smart refrigerator, the custom pendant lighting, and the expensive espresso machine sitting on the counter. All of it belonged to me. Every single receipt was filed away in my heavily encrypted personal drive. We understand each other perfectly, Spencer, I replied. I will leave the premises. I will pack my things while you two are enjoying the snow in Aspen. And just as you requested, I will only take what legally belongs to me. I will not take a single item that you purchased with your own money. Madison clapped her hands together, letting out a sharp, joyful laugh. See, Spencer? She is being reasonable. This is so much easier than fighting. She turned to me, her eyes shining with mock sympathy. Thank you, Allison. I know this must be hard for you, losing your husband and your home all in one night. But you will find a small apartment somewhere that suits your budget. Maybe something closer to wherever you do your little accounting jobs. Her condescension washed over me without leaving a mark. I did not feel humiliated. I did not feel defeated. I felt a thrilling, dangerous anticipation building in my chest. They were handing me the keys to their own destruction, completely oblivious to the trap they had just eagerly locked themselves inside. Have a wonderful flight, I told them, picking up my purse from the counter. Enjoy, Aspen. Spencer grabbed his luggage by the door, completely dismissing my presence already. Do not forget Allison. Sunday night. If you take anything that belongs to this house, I will press charges for theft. My lawyers are already on standby. I will remember that I promised. As the front door clicked shut behind them, the absolute silence of the house wrapped around me. I stood alone in the center of the kitchen, taking a deep breath. My husband had just abandoned our 5-year marriage for a younger woman, attempted to steal my home, and threatened me with legal action. He believed he was a master strategist. He believed he had outsmarted his boring wife by securing a lease with Aegis Holdings LLC. The silence in the kitchen was absolute the moment the front door clicked shut. I stood still for 3 full minutes, listening to the distant sound of Spencer starting his luxury car. The gravel crunched under the tires as he pulled away, speeding off toward the airport, with his young assistant to celebrate their stolen weekend. He had left me behind with a 48-hour ultimatum to vacate the premises, confident his aggressive tactics had completely trapped me. He believed his sudden lease cancellation trapped me in a corner. He truly believed he had won. He was spectacularly wrong. The facade of the devastated wife vanished the second his taillights disappeared. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up the divorce documents he had tossed right at me, and stacked them in a folder. I did not need them right now. I had much more important work to do. I walked down the hall to my home office, locked the door, and booted up my laptop. I was no longer a discarded partner packing her bags in defeat. I was a professional forensic accountant, conducting a ruthless audit of my own marriage. Spencer was a man consumed by his public image. Working as a high-tier wealth manager meant he felt a desperate need to project immense success to clients. His massive salary went directly toward maintaining that carefully crafted illusion. He leased a new Porsche every 2 years. He bought vintage luxury watches kept in a velvet-lined display case in his closet. He spent thousands on custom-tailored suits and extravagant client dinners at exclusive steakhouses. Because his money was tied up in looking incredibly rich, he flatly refused to spend anything on the necessities of our daily life. He called buying furniture a poor return on investment. He considered paying for appliances, decor, and daily household maintenance a strictly domestic issue that fell entirely under my responsibilities. I never argued with him about it. I simply opened a highly secure, separate personal bank account he truly had no access to, and used my own substantial income to furnish the entire property from top to bottom. I paid for the custom velvet curtains in the living room. I bought the $8,000 smart refrigerator currently humming in the kitchen. I purchased the imported Turkish rugs, the memory foam mattresses, the crystal light fixtures, and the massive flat-screen televisions mounted on the walls. I even paid for the high-end security system and the automated smart locks. Because meticulously tracking money is practically my professional expertise, I kept every single receipt. I opened my encrypted cloud drive and pulled up a master spreadsheet titled Domestic Expenditures. It contained 5 years of meticulous financial records. Every purchase had a digital receipt, a serial number, a delivery invoice, and a scanned bank statement proving the funds came exclusively from my individual account. In our legal jurisdiction, property purchased with sole funds from a separate account with clear documentation remained separate property in the event of a divorce. Spencer had no legal claim to anything inside these walls. He explicitly told me to take only what legally belonged to me. I fully intended to comply. I grabbed my tablet and began walking through the house, conducting a methodical inventory. I moved from room to room, matching the physical items in my home to the digital lines on my detailed spreadsheet. I started in the living room. The custom Italian leather sofa Madison had just been admiring was immediately flagged for removal. The solid oak coffee table, the surround sound speakers bolted to the walls, and the automated smart blinds were all quickly checked off the list. I moved into the kitchen. I scanned the barcode on the back of the smart espresso machine and checked it against my invoice from 3 years ago. I opened the cabinets and carefully counted the sets of fine bone china, the expensive crystal wine glasses, and the heavy cast iron cookware. I even logged the imported spices, the expensive olive oils, and the custom shelving units I had installed. If I bought it, it was definitely going with me. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom. Spencer had packed a single suitcase for his weekend trip to Aspen, leaving the rest of his designer wardrobe hanging in the closet. I completely ignored his clothes. Instead, I checked the serial numbers on the matching walnut dressers, the bedside tables, and the expensive king-sized bed frame. I pulled out the original receipts for the silk sheets and the premium down comforter. I marked them all for their immediate extraction. My favorite part of the inventory was the bathrooms. I had personally contracted a remodeling team 2 years ago to upgrade the fixtures. I paid for the heated towel racks, the rainfall shower heads, and the electronic bidets. I had the invoices from the plumbing supply company clearly bearing my name and my separate credit card number. They were not permanent structural fixtures of the house. They were removable upgrades I owned entirely. They were definitely going on the moving truck. By midnight, my master spreadsheet was complete. I had a legally undeniable claim to everything inside the property. Spencer actually owned his clothes, his watches, his golf clubs, and his expensive bourbon. Everything else was mine. I sat back and looked at the grand total. I owned exactly $142,000 worth of domestic assets currently sitting in this house. Spencer believed he was kicking me out into the cold. He assumed he and his pregnant assistant would return to a fully furnished luxury home ready to start their new perfect lives. He commanded me to pack my things. He simply failed to realize that my things meant the entire environment he lived in. I picked up my cell phone. The silent calculation was officially over. I needed a massive crew, large moving trucks, and absolute swift efficiency. I made a call to a premium relocation service I had frequently used for corporate clients in the past and trusted implicitly. I offered them triple their usual weekend rate for an immediate, completely comprehensive extraction of all goods. They guaranteed a crew of 15 strong men and 3 oversized transport trucks at my driveway by sunrise on Saturday morning. The dispatcher sounded highly skeptical when I explicitly told him we were physically taking the fixtures, but my massive advance payment instantly cleared any lingering hesitation or doubt. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp, biting winter chill. I closely tracked Spencer's flight through the airline application on my phone. At exactly 8 in the morning, the status finally changed to departed. He was now completely airborne, entirely disconnected from the ground, and utterly unable to intervene. As if on cue, the deep rumble of heavy diesel engines echoed loudly down my quiet suburban street. 3 massive moving trucks pulled heavily into the driveway, blocking the front entrance completely. A crew of 15 rugged professionals in matching gray uniforms piled out, carrying heavy dollies, loud power tools, and endless stacks of industrial packing boxes. The crew chief, a burly man named Dave, walked up the porch steps holding a thick clipboard. He respectfully asked for the removal inventory. I handed him my meticulously printed spreadsheet complete with bright highlighted sections for the plumbing and electrical fixtures. Dave scanned the list, his eyes visibly widening as he realized the sheer immense scale of the entire operation. He looked up at me, clearly surprised by my demands. "You want us to take the door handles?" I nodded firmly, handing him a specialized toolkit I had specifically purchased early that morning. "I bought the custom brass levers for every single door in this house," I explained smoothly. "The original cheap builder grade knobs are stored in a cardboard box in the garage. Put those back on. Take my brass levers. I want this place stripped down to exactly what the property management company initially provided 5 years ago. Nothing more and absolutely nothing less." Dave grinned widely, recognizing the beautiful ruthlessness of a woman legally taking back her power. He blew a sharp whistle, clapping his large hands together. "All right, boys," he shouted loudly to his crew. "We have a full tactical extraction. Strip it completely to the drywall." The resulting dismantling was a masterpiece of absolute devastation. It was not just a typical move, it was the total legal erasure of a 5-year marriage. The crew started in the living room. They wrapped the Italian leather sofa in heavy moving blankets and rolled it carefully out the front door. They unbolted the massive flat-screen television, leaving bare drywall anchors ugly and exposed. They rolled up the imported Turkish rugs, immediately revealing the cold, scuffed hardwood underneath. I stood in the center of the chaos, directing traffic with clinical precision. 4 men tackled the kitchen. They unhooked the water lines to my $8,000 smart refrigerator and carefully wheeled it onto the loading ramp. The expensive espresso machine, the heavy cast-iron cookware, and every piece of fine bone china disappeared into padded boxes. When they finished, the kitchen looked exactly like a vacant model home. The extraction moved into the intricate interior details of the house. 2 professional electricians went room to room, unscrewing the crystal light fixtures and replacing them with bare incandescent bulbs I had bought from a cheap discount hardware store. I watched them dismantle the smart home security system. They removed the digital thermostat, the video doorbell, and every security camera mounted on the exterior walls. Spencer would be coming back to a house entirely cut off from the modern world. The master bedroom was next. The men carried out the heavy walnut dressers and the premium memory foam mattress. I walked into Spencer's closet. His bespoke suits and luxury clothing hung uselessly in the empty space. I instructed the movers to take the expensive velvet hangers I had bought, leaving his clothes piled unceremoniously on the bare floor. I even took the custom shoe racks. The bathrooms were the most brutal part of the operation. Plumbers detached my heated towel racks and the electronic bidets. They unscrewed the luxury rainfall shower heads, replacing them with the cheapest plastic fixtures available on the market. I walked into the master bathroom, looked at the empty toilet paper holder, and smiled. I grabbed the last 3 rolls of toilet paper, tossed them into my personal bag, and zipped it shut. I was leaving them absolutely nothing. By late afternoon, the house was completely unrecognizable. The warm, inviting home I had built was entirely gone. Every room echoed with a hollow, empty sound. The beautiful brass door handles were replaced with tarnished aluminum. The dimmable smart bulbs were replaced with harsh, glaring lights. The entire space felt completely stripped of life, love, and comfort. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. My heels clicked loudly against the bare floors. The operation had been executed perfectly. The 3 massive moving trucks were fully loaded and waiting in the driveway. I had systematically removed $142,000 worth of domestic assets in just under 8 hours. The house was now exactly as the property management company had originally leased it. Spencer had demanded that I pack my things and leave. I had simply followed his instructions to the absolute letter of the law. I walked out the front door, leaving it unlocked since I had removed the smart lock system. I stepped out into the crisp evening air, breathing in the scent of absolute freedom. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from the moving company confirming the secure storage facility had received all my assets safely and securely. I smiled to myself, knowing the ultimate trap was now perfectly set. Let the games finally begin. I was standing in the driveway watching the final moving truck secure its doors when a familiar black SUV turned onto the street. It pulled up directly behind my car. I recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Jamal, my husband's brother-in-law. Jamal is a 36-year-old architect, a hard-working African-American man who married Spencer's older sister Penelope 5 years ago. He always looked exhausted at our mandatory Sunday family dinners, sitting quietly, while the rest of the family loudly boasted about their wealth and status. Jamal stepped out of his car wearing faded jeans and a simple hooded sweatshirt, completely unprepared for the scene unfolding in front of him. He walked up the concrete driveway and stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at the massive commercial moving trucks, then looked past my shoulder through the large bay windows of the house. The interior was completely dark hollow and stripped to the bare drywall. He looked back at me, his eyebrows raised high in genuine shock. "Allison, what exactly is going on around here?" he asked, his deep voice, cautious but not accusatory. "Did you get robbed?" I took a slow breath, bracing myself for a massive family confrontation. I assumed he would immediately pull out his phone to alert Penelope, who would frantically call Spencer and his parents to report my actions. I decided to give him the absolute unfiltered truth. "No, Jamal, we did not get robbed today," I said, maintaining direct eye contact. "Spencer brought his 26-year-old pregnant assistant to the house on our 5th wedding anniversary. He handed me divorce papers and gave me exactly 48 hours to pack my things and leave. He explicitly told me to take only what I bought with my own money. So I did exactly that." Jamal stood completely frozen for a moment. He looked at the empty house again, processing the sheer magnitude of my retaliation. He slowly looked back at me, and to my absolute astonishment, a massive, genuine smile broke across his face. He let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed down the quiet suburban street. "He really told you to take what was yours?" Jamal asked, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "And he actually forgot that you funded every single piece of furniture and fixture in that entire property." "He forgot because he considers my forensic accounting career to be nothing more than a boring little hobby," I replied, relaxing my defensive posture. "He thinks his luxury car leases make him the provider. He thinks his name on a rental lease makes him the king of the castle." Jamal chuckled again, walking past me toward the open garage. "I came over here to grab my power drill that Spencer borrowed 6 months ago and refused to return," Jamal said. "But it looks like you could use an extra pair of hands with these last few boxes." I watched in quiet awe as Jamal rolled up his sleeves, picked up a heavy cardboard box filled with my home office files, and effortlessly carried it over to the trunk of my SUV. He did not ask for explanations. He did not try to mediate or defend his brother-in-law. He simply chose a side, and he chose mine. As we worked side by side loading the remaining items into my vehicle, Jamal opened up in a way he never had during 5 years of awkward holiday dinners. He told me he was completely fed up with Penelope and the entire toxic culture of Spencer's family. He explained how Howard and Beverly, my in-laws, had raised deeply entitled narcissistic monsters who believed the rules of basic human decency simply did not apply to them. "Penelope is exactly like Spencer," Jamal said, handing me a stack of framed degrees to pack into the back seat. "She drains our joint accounts to buy designer bags to impress her country club friends, and then gaslights me when I try to discuss our household budget. Her parents always swoop in to bail her out, telling me I need to be a more supportive husband. They enable her worst impulses, just like they enable Spencer. I have spent 5 years watching Howard and Beverly treat you like a second-class citizen. They constantly mocked your career at the dinner table, completely oblivious to your intelligence. Seeing you fight back and take everything away from him is incredibly satisfying." I nodded carefully, placing the frames in my trunk. "I always wondered how you managed to survive those Sunday dinners without losing your mind, Jamal. You always seemed like you were observing an entirely different reality than the rest." "I was just taking mental notes," he replied, leaning against the bumper of my car. "I have been quietly separating my own finances for the past year. I am planning my own exit strategy soon." Seeing you pull off an operation like this today, executing a completely legal and absolutely devastating extraction, gives me a lot of hope. You are doing exactly what I have been dreaming of doing for months. He handed me the power drill he had come to retrieve, holding it up like a trophy. I will keep this, he said with a wink. And do not worry about my wife or your precious in-laws. I have not seen a single thing today. As far as I am concerned, I drove by the house was completely locked up and nobody was home. Let Spencer walk into that empty shell blind. He deserves every single second of the shock. I smiled and watched Jamal get back into his black SUV and drive away down the street. The moving trucks had already departed for the secure storage facility. I closed the trunk of my car, locked the doors, and drove away from the hollow shell of a house, leaving my cheating husband to face the devastating consequences of his own arrogance. Before Jamal climbed into the driver's seat of his black SUV, he paused and reached deep into the front pocket of his faded jeans. He walked back over to where I was standing by my open trunk. His expression had shifted from amused satisfaction to absolute deadly seriousness. He held out his closed fist and dropped a small silver USB drive directly into the palm of my hand. The metal felt cold against my skin. I looked down at the drive, then back up at him, questioning his sudden change in demeanor. I found this 2 nights ago, Jamal explained, keeping his voice low, even though the suburban street was completely deserted. Penelope is incredibly careless with her digital security. She left her tablet logged into the shared family cloud network. I was looking for a scanned copy of our tax returns so I could finalize my own exit strategy. Instead, I stumbled into a hidden folder Spencer created. He thought he buried it deep under layers of fake marketing presentations, but he is a wealth manager, not an IT expert. I downloaded everything before Penelope realized what I was looking at. What exactly is on this drive? I asked, my fingers closing tightly around the small device. Jamal leaned closer, his dark eyes intense. It is a complete financial disaster, Allison. I am talking about massive unexplained withdrawals from his corporate accounts. I saw wire transfers to offshore holding companies in the Cayman Islands. I saw digital receipts for high-stakes online gambling platforms that total more than my entire annual salary. The man is completely underwater. He is bleeding cash from every possible direction, and he is dragging his clients down with him. I felt a sharp thrill of professional adrenaline shoot straight through my veins. Spencer had always mocked my job as boring bookkeeping. He had absolutely no idea what a forensic accountant actually does. He had no idea that tracing hidden money, exposing corporate fraud, and dismantling complex financial lies was my exact area of expertise. You are the forensic accountant, Jamal said, a fierce, determined smile returning to his face. Take him down. Burn his entire kingdom to the ground. He turned around, got into his SUV, and drove away, leaving me standing in the driveway with the ultimate weapon resting quietly in my hand. I immediately got into the driver's seat of my own car, locked the doors, and grabbed my work laptop from my travel bag. I did not even wait to drive to my temporary apartment. I needed to see the data right now. I booted up my encrypted machine, plugged the silver USB drive into the port, and opened the primary folder. Jamal was absolutely right. Spencer had made amateur mistakes trying to hide his digital footprint. I quickly bypassed his weak passwords and opened a series of complex spreadsheets and bank statements. My eyes rapidly scanned the rows of data, my professional training immediately recognizing the glaring patterns of deliberate financial fraud. Spencer was not just funding a lavish lifestyle and an affair with a younger assistant. He was actively embezzling millions of dollars from his own high-net-worth clients. I traced a clear, undeniable line of money moving from the retirement accounts of elderly investors directly into a shell company Spencer had registered in Delaware. He was siphoning funds to cover catastrophic losses from underground sports betting and high-stakes poker games. The sheer audacity of his crimes was breathtaking. He had forged client signatures on authorization forms, fabricated quarterly return statements, and manipulated the firm's software to hide the missing capital. Every single time he suffered a massive gambling loss, another client account mysteriously dropped in value, masked by fake market fluctuation reports he had drafted himself. I clicked open a subfolder labeled Personal Expenses and gasped out loud in the quiet interior of my car. Spencer had completely drained our joint savings account the previous morning, but that was just the beginning. I found digital receipts for diamond earrings, luxury hotel suites, and first-class flights to Europe, all purchased for Madison using stolen client funds. He was buying his mistress expensive gifts with money stolen straight from the pensions of retired teachers and nurses. The deeper I dug into the data, the more devastating the picture became. Spencer had taken out a massive high-interest loan from a highly questionable private lending firm using his future corporate bonuses as collateral. When those bonuses failed to materialize due to his declining performance, the lenders had started demanding immediate repayment. He was desperately moving stolen money around in a frantic, failing attempt to keep himself out of a dangerous physical confrontation. He did not force me out of our home simply because Madison wanted a calm environment for her pregnancy. He forced me out because he was entirely broke, heavily in debt, and desperate to liquidate any remaining assets he could find. He thought he could secure the house, sell off my expensive custom furniture, and quickly generate enough cash to keep his illegal lenders at bay for a few more weeks. He thought I was a naive, obedient wife who would quietly walk away and cry. He had no idea he had just handed a loaded gun to a woman who knew exactly where to shoot. I spent the next 2 hours sitting in my parked car, systematically compiling the raw data into an ironclad, indisputable legal dossier. I categorized the fraudulent transfers, highlighted the forged signatures, and traced the stolen money directly to Madison's luxury purchases. I built a comprehensive roadmap of his entire criminal enterprise, formatting it perfectly for federal investigators to review. I carefully closed my laptop, started the engine, and finally drove out of the suburban driveway. The weekend passed with quiet, calculating anticipation. I settled into a luxury extended stay hotel downtown, sipping black coffee while finalizing the digital dossier for the federal authorities. Meanwhile, a massive winter storm rolled over the mountains in Colorado, slightly delaying the return flight for the happy couple. They did not land at the local airport until late Sunday evening. Spencer drove his leased Porsche through the quiet suburban streets, his ego undoubtedly inflated after a lavish weekend of heavy drinking and spending stolen money. According to the timeline he proudly laid out during his eviction ultimatum, he expected to arrive at a meticulously clean, fully furnished designer home. He likely promised his young pregnant mistress that she could spend the evening rearranging my expensive silk pillows on the custom Italian leather sofa. He probably envisioned himself pouring a glass of expensive bourbon from the vintage brass bar cart while standing over the smart home security panel, feeling like the absolute king of the castle. He pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and grabbed their designer luggage. Madison walked up the concrete steps, shivering in the cold night air, complaining about the sudden temperature drop. Spencer confidently reached for the front door, expecting to use the biometric fingerprint scanner I had installed 3 years ago. Instead, his hand found a cheap, tarnished aluminum deadbolt. He frowned, pulled out his heavy keychain, and jammed the metal key into the basic lock. The heavy wooden door swung open, and Spencer reached inside to flick the switch for the foyer lights. He expected the soft, warm glow of the smart dimmers to gradually illuminate the entryway. Instead, a harsh, blindingly bright, incandescent bulb flickered to life above them. The immediate silence that greeted them was absolutely not the peaceful, comforting quiet of a highly luxurious home. It was a stark, echoing void. Spencer slowly stepped over the bare threshold, his expensive leather shoes clicking loudly against the bare, scuffed hardwood floors. The sound bounced off the empty drywall, reverberating through the desolate space. He immediately stopped dead in his tracks, dropping his heavy luggage onto the floor with a loud thud. Madison suddenly bumped into his back, letting out a sharp gasp of confusion. The beautiful open-concept living room was completely gone. The custom velvet curtains, the massive flat-screen television, the surround sound speakers, and the imported Turkish rugs had all vanished. The walls were dotted with ugly exposed drywall anchors where my expensive artwork used to hang. Spencer practically ran into the kitchen, his breathing turning rapid and shallow. He stared at the empty space between the custom cabinets where the $8,000 smart refrigerator used to hum. The heavy cast iron cookware, the fine bone china, the expensive espresso machine, and even the custom shelving units were entirely absent. The kitchen island where he had arrogantly thrown the divorce papers just 48 hours ago was completely bare. Madison stumbled down the hallway, her high heels echoing violently in the hollow shell of the house. She pushed open the door to the master suite and let out a horrified shriek. The premium memory foam mattress, the walnut dressers, and the silk sheets were gone. She rushed frantically into the master bathroom, hoping to find some semblance of the luxury she had been promised. She stared in utter disbelief at the cheap plastic shower head protruding from the wall. The heated towel racks and the electronic bidet had been ruthlessly unbolted. She looked down at the metal toilet paper holder. It was completely empty. The sheer reality of the situation crashed down upon her. She had actively helped destroy a marriage thinking she was securing a life of effortless wealth and absolute comfort. Instead, she was standing in a freezing, stripped-down box with absolutely nothing. Madison collapsed onto the cold, dusty floorboards. She pulled her knees to her chest and broke down in violent, uncontrollable hysterics. Her loud sobs echoed through the barren hallway, amplifying the absolute pathetic nature of their triumphant return. Spencer stood in the center of the empty living room, his face turning a dangerous mottled shade of crimson. His chest heaved with explosive anger. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and aggressively dialed my number. I was sitting comfortably at the hotel desk watching his caller identification flash across the screen. I accepted the call and held the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. "Allison," he screamed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated rage. His shouting echoed wildly in the background of the call, highlighting the absolute emptiness of his surroundings. "What the hell did you do? You stripped the entire house. I am calling the police right now. I am having you arrested for grand theft. I told you not to touch the furniture. You are going to federal prison for this, you crazy, vindictive thief." He was panting heavily over the line, eagerly waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to desperately apologize or loudly beg for mercy. He wanted a screaming match to justify his anger. I did not give him the satisfaction of a verbal response. I simply lowered the phone from my ear and tapped the red button ending the call instantly. I opened my text messages and selected the screenshot I had prepared earlier that afternoon. It was a high-resolution image of my master domestic assets spreadsheet. It clearly displayed the serial numbers, the original purchase dates, and the indisputable proof that every single item had been bought exclusively with funds from my separate personal account. I attached the image to a new message and typed out my final response. "I only took what I bought with my own money. Enjoy your empty house." I hit send, placed my phone face down on the smooth surface of the hotel desk, and finally allowed myself to smile. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency I always brought to my professional life. I walked into the soaring glass atrium of my accounting firm wearing a charcoal suit that projected authority. My mind was already organizing the digital dossier I had compiled against Spencer, preparing to initiate the reporting protocols. I held a fresh cup of coffee, greeting my colleagues with polite nods as I approached the secure elevator banks. The weekend of dismantling my personal life was behind me, replaced by the clinical precision of my career. My quiet transition into the work week shattered instantly. The revolving doors of the lobby swung open, revealing an agitated trio marching toward the security desk. It was my father-in-law, Howard, flanked by his wife, Beverly, and their oldest daughter, Penelope. Spencer had spent his Sunday night crying to his parents, playing the victim of a sudden robbery. Howard and Beverly had always operated under the belief that Spencer was a golden child. In their misogynistic worldview, a husband was the absolute ruler of his household, and any defiance from a wife was an act of treason. Allison Beverly shrieked, her shrill voice echoing against the marble walls of the lobby. Several of my colleagues, including senior partners and junior analysts, stopped and turned to watch the commotion. I stood my ground near the security turnstiles, my posture calm. Howard pushed past a protesting security guard, his face dark with fury. Penelope trailed behind them, clutching her designer handbag, her face twisted into a self-righteous sneer. She had always hated me, mocking my dedication to my career, while she floated through life on her husband Jamal's income and her parents' endless bailouts. "You vindictive, hysterical woman!" Beverly yelled as she closed the distance between us. She did not bother lowering her voice. She wanted an audience, assuming public humiliation would force me into submission. "How dare you destroy my son's home? You went in like a thief and stripped his house bare while he was away on a business trip." I looked at her, unfazed by her manufactured outrage. "I took what belonged to me, Beverly. Every single receipt proves it. Your son evicted me to move in his pregnant 26-year-old assistant. I complied with his 48-hour timeline." Howard stepped forward, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. "You listen to me carefully," he growled, projecting the same toxic entitlement he had passed down to Spencer. "You are going to call those movers right now. You are going to put every single piece of that furniture back where you found it. A wife does not pull a stunt like this. Spencer paid the rent. He provided for you. You owe him that environment, and you are going to fix this embarrassment you caused our family." The audacity of his demand was staggering. They believed I existed to furnish a comfortable life for their cheating son and his new mistress. Penelope scoffed, crossing her arms. "You are acting like a lunatic, Allison," she chimed in, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Just because Spencer realized he needed a woman to give him a family does not give you the right to steal his property. He deserves to be happy. You are trying to ruin his life because you could not give him what he needed." The cruelty in Penelope's voice was intentional. For years, this family had whispered behind my back about my focus on my career instead of motherhood. They diminished my value, treating my financial independence as a character flaw rather than an achievement. They believed my only purpose was to serve Spencer. "I am not returning anything," I stated, my voice projecting a cold boundary that cut through their frantic noise. "And if you do not leave this lobby, I will have building security press charges for trespassing." The threat of security did not deter Beverly. It only ignited her worst impulses. The idea that a woman, her daughter-in-law, would dare to defy her commands short-circuited her mind. She lunged forward with speed. Before the security guards could intervene, Beverly swung her arm and slapped me across the face. The crack of her palm striking my cheek echoed through the quiet lobby. Several people gasped. My coffee spilled onto the floor, the cup shattering into pieces. I did not fall. I did not raise my hand to touch my cheek. I stood there absorbing the blow without showing a single ounce of fear or weakness. "You are a barren failure!" Beverly screamed, her face contorted with unhinged rage. "You are a pathetic, jealous woman throwing a tantrum because Madison is carrying the grandchild you were too broken to give us. You are stealing my son's things because you are jealous of a pregnant girl who knows how to keep a man. Return the furniture today or we will destroy you in court." The security guards grabbed Howard and Beverly, restraining them and pulling them toward the doors. Penelope scurried backward, looking terrified, as she realized her mother had just committed a blatant assault in front of dozens of witnesses and security cameras. I stood still, watching them struggle against the guards. They had come here to gaslight me, to bully me into submission, using the same family pressure they had weaponized for 5 years. They thought a display of aggression would break my spirit and make me surrender to their demands. They failed to realize that every word they shouted and the strike Beverly just delivered only handed me more ammunition. "You just assaulted me in front of 30 witnesses, Beverly," I said, my voice cutting over her screaming as the guards dragged her away. "You have underestimated the woman you are dealing with today. I will ensure you regret coming here to threaten my independent life." Beverly struggled against the security guards, her designer shoes slipping on the spilled coffee. Howard tried to block the guards from holding his wife, yelling about lawsuits and disrespect. Penelope stood a few feet away, her arms crossed defensively, still trying to project an air of superiority despite the chaotic scene her parents were causing. I did not wipe the coffee droplets from my shoes. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my tablet. I woke the screen and tapped directly into my encrypted files. I had anticipated a retaliatory strike from Spencer's family, though I assumed it would be a barrage of aggressive phone calls, not a physical assault in a corporate lobby. But since they brought the fight directly to my workplace, I decided to finish it here. Penelope smirked at me, finding her courage now that her parents were being manhandled. You can play the victim all you want, Allison, she sneered. But we are taking you to court. You are going to pay Spencer back for every single couch cushion. You are a thief. I walked toward Penelope. Since we are discussing thieves and returning money, Penelope, let us talk about your financial integrity. I pulled up a specific digital document on my tablet. Let us talk about the $50,000 you owe me. The smug look vanished from Penelope's face instantly. Her jaw actually dropped and the color drained rapidly from her cheeks, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. She darted her eyes around the lobby, suddenly hyper-aware of the executives and security personnel watching our every move. Her confident posture crumbled. Howard stopped yelling at the guards and turned his head. What is she talking about, Penelope? He barked loudly. I turned the tablet screen around so Howard and Beverly could clearly see the illuminated document. 2 years ago, I announced my voice carrying cleanly across the marble lobby. Penelope came to my office crying. She had secretly racked up $50,000 in credit card debt, buying designer clothes and luxury vacations to keep up with her country club friends. She was absolutely terrified her husband Jamal would find out and divorce her for financial infidelity. I drafted a legally binding promissory note. I continued swiping to the second page of the document, showing Penelope's frantic signature. I transferred $50,000 from my separate personal savings directly to her creditors. She begged me to hide it from Jamal. She swore she would pay me back in monthly installments. To date, she has not paid back a single cent. She has completely ignored the debt while spending Jamal's money on expensive handbags and country club lunches. Beverly stopped struggling against the security guard. She stared at her daughter in absolute shock. Penelope, is this true? She demanded. You took $50,000 from her. Penelope was physically shaking. Mom, I can explain. Jamal was going to check the accounts. I needed the money to balance the statements before he saw the massive deficit. I was desperate. I stepped closer to Penelope, dropping my voice to a sharp tactical pitch that only she and her parents could hear. Jamal stopped by the house on Saturday while I was moving out. We had a very enlightening conversation about your entitlement and the toxic financial culture of this family. He actually helped me pack my boxes. He mentioned he is looking closely at your joint accounts right now. I wonder what Jamal will do when I email him this promissory note today. I wonder how quickly he will pack his own bags when he realizes you have been lying to him for years. Do not do this, Penelope pleaded, her voice cracking with sheer panic. Allison, please. Jamal will leave me. He warned me about the spending last year. If he sees this debt, he will file for divorce. You cannot ruin my marriage. I smiled the same chilling smile I had given Spencer 48 hours ago. You came into my place of work to call me a barren failure and a thief. Your mother physically assaulted me. You demanded I return furniture I bought with my own money to furnish a home for your brother's pregnant mistress. You supported Spencer while he tried to kick me out onto the street. And now you are begging me for a favor to save your own marriage. The sheer hypocrisy is astounding. Howard grabbed Penelope's arm, his face flush with deep embarrassment. The illusion of their powerful, perfect family was entirely shattered on the floor of my corporate lobby. We are leaving, Howard muttered, completely avoiding eye contact with the security guards who were still standing on high alert. Beverly, walk out the door right now. Do not say another word. Beverly looked at me with pure hatred, but the fight had completely left her body. The terrifying realization that I held the ultimate power to destroy her daughter's marriage completely paralyzed her. They had marched into my building expecting an easy victory, expecting to intimidate a discarded wife into submissive compliance. Instead, they had walked directly into a devastating counterstrike. They realized I was not a victim they could bully. I was a forensic accountant who kept meticulous receipts on every single member of their fraudulent family. The security guards escorted the three of them through the revolving glass doors. Penelope was sobbing wildly into her hands, already frantically trying to figure out how to hide the truth from Jamal. Howard was actively pushing Beverly toward their parked car, shouting at her for causing a massive public scene. I locked my tablet, slipped it back into my leather tote bag, and turned to the head of security. Please ensure those 3 individuals are permanently banned from entering this building, I instructed clearly. The guard nodded, radioing the front desk. I took a deep breath, adjusted my suit jacket, and walked calmly toward the elevators. The first counterstrike was complete. While I returned to my office to finalize the forensic audit of his hidden accounts, Spencer was dealing with the immediate fallout of his empty reality. The harsh morning sunlight poured through the bare windows of the suburban house, illuminating the thick layer of dust left behind by the movers. Spencer sat on his only remaining possession, a hard plastic cooler he had found in the garage. Madison paced back and forth across the scuffed hardwood floor, wrapping her arms around her chest to ward off the freezing chill of the unheated living room. Spencer pulled his smartphone from his pocket, desperate for a distraction from Madison, complaining about her sore back. He opened his email inbox, expecting to see routine updates from his wealth management firm. Instead, a high-priority message sat at the very top of his screen. The sender was listed as the legal department of Aegis Holdings, LLC, the property management company he had so arrogantly contacted just last week to secure his exclusive lease. He opened the email expecting a simple welcome packet or an automated receipt for his initial deposit. His blood ran entirely cold as he read the subject line. Notice of lease violation and immediate penalty activation. Spencer rapidly scanned the formal legal text. The document outlined a direct breach of contract regarding Section 4 of his newly minted lease agreement. The clause specifically prohibited the introduction of any unauthorized, unvetted long-term occupants into the residence without prior written consent and an extensive background check by the property owners. The email included a stunningly crisp photograph taken from the driveway just yesterday morning, clearly showing Madison carrying her designer luggage over the threshold. The management company was not simply warning him, they were executing a punitive financial strike. Because he had actively moved an unapproved tenant into the property, the strict penalty clauses he had hastily signed without reading were immediately triggered. The email boldly stated that his monthly rental rate was instantly tripled, effective immediately. Furthermore, the newly calculated balance was due by the end of the current business day, or formal eviction proceedings would commence within 72 hours. Spencer jumped up from the plastic cooler, his face draining of color. The original rent was already a massive monthly expenditure designed for a dual-income household. Tripling that amount pushed the required payment to an astronomical figure that would instantly devour his remaining liquid cash. "What is wrong?" Madison asked, stopping her frantic pacing. "You look like you just saw a ghost." Spencer quickly forced a confident, dismissive smile onto his face. He could not let his new pregnant girlfriend see him panic. He had promised her a life of effortless luxury, and admitting he was terrified of a rent increase would completely shatter the illusion he had built. "It is nothing important," Spencer lied smoothly, pocketing his phone. "Just a minor clerical error from the property management company. I will easily clear it up this afternoon. But first we need to get you off this cold floor. Let us go buy some new furniture right now. We will furnish this entire place exactly how you want it, and then I will take care of the rent payment." Madison immediately brightened the prospect of spending his money erasing her previous misery. She grabbed her coat and they hurried out to his leased Porsche. Spencer drove them to a premium modern furniture showroom downtown, fully intending to buy a new sofa, a luxury bed, and an entire dining set to appease Madison. He strutted through the showroom doors, projecting absolute wealth and authority. He allowed Madison to point out incredibly expensive imported Italian leather sectionals and massive oak dining tables. The sales associate eagerly tallied up the exorbitant total, presenting Spencer with an invoice for $42,000. Spencer pulled out his premium platinum credit card, tossing it onto the sales counter with a practiced, arrogant flick of his wrist. The sales associate swiped the card through the terminal. The machine beeped a sharp negative tone. "Declined." The associate frowned, apologizing profusely, and tried the card a second time. The machine loudly rejected the transaction again. Spencer felt a hot, prickling sensation wash over the back of his neck. He quickly snatched the platinum card back and handed the associate his backup gold card. He blamed a fraud protection hold acting inconvenienced by the banking security measures. The gold card was declined. Madison watched him, her initial excitement slowly melting into visible embarrassment as other affluent shoppers began to stare at their transaction. Spencer pulled out his phone, his hands shaking slightly, and opened his mobile banking application to transfer funds directly. A bright red banner completely blocked his access to the dashboard. The bold text informed him that his accounts were currently restricted by a mandatory legal hold. Panic finally clawed its way up his throat. He dialed his personal banking representative, demanding immediate answers. The banker answered with a legally bound tone. Spencer learned the very devastating truth standing right there in the middle of the luxury furniture showroom. I had officially filed the preliminary divorce paperwork at the exact moment the courthouse opened that morning. Along with the standard divorce petition, my aggressive legal team had submitted an ex parte financial restraining order. The judge had signed it instantly. Every single marital asset, every shared bank account, every line of credit, and every investment portfolio was entirely frozen. The court order specifically prohibited the depletion of any funds until a full financial disclosure and equitable division could be legally mediated. Spencer had absolutely no access to his wealth. He could not buy a single throw pillow for his pregnant mistress, and he certainly could not pay the newly tripled rent to Aegis Holdings LLC. He was a wealthy man on paper, completely locked out of his own vault. Madison stared at him desperately, waiting for her promised luxury, while Spencer finally realized he was completely trapped. While Spencer stood frozen in the middle of the luxury furniture showroom, completely paralyzed by his sudden financial ruin, a second devastating shockwave was already detonating across town. The carefully constructed facade of his entire family was collapsing simultaneously. Jamal sat at the heavy oak desk in his home office, staring intently at his computer monitor. He had just received a highly secure email directly from my corporate account. I kept the message incredibly brief, attaching only the legally binding promissory note bearing Penelope's frantic signature, and a clear record of the $50,000 transfer I made to her creditors 2 years ago. Jamal did not simply react with explosive anger. He reacted with the cold, clinical precision of a man who finally possessed the undeniable proof he needed to execute his escape. The front door of their upscale suburban house slammed shut. Penelope stormed inside, still fuming from the humiliating physical confrontation in my office lobby. She threw her designer handbag onto the entryway console, immediately complaining loudly about how disrespectful and insane I was acting. She marched straight into Jamal's office, eager to control the narrative before I could reach him. Jamal turned his monitor around, silently displaying the illuminated document. Penelope stopped her frantic rant instantly. The remaining color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and terrified. She opened her mouth to deploy her usual tactics of gaslighting and deflection, but Jamal held up a single hand, silencing her completely. "Do not insult my intelligence by trying to lie your way out of this," Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a terrifyingly calm authority. "You secretly borrowed $50,000 from your sister-in-law to cover up massive credit card debts you accrued behind my back. You explicitly hid this financial infidelity from me, and you have not repaid a single cent in 2 years. Sai." Penelope began to physically shake, her eyes darting around the room as she desperately searched for an excuse. "Jamal, it was a mistake. I was going to tell you. I just needed to maintain appearances for the country club. My parents said they would eventually help me pay it off." "Your parents enable your toxic entitlement," Jamal corrected sharply. "They raised you to believe that taking advantage of other people is perfectly acceptable as long as you maintain your precious social status. I am completely done financing this fraudulent lifestyle, Penelope." He quickly picked up his phone, tapping a sequence of commands on his banking application. "I transferred my entire salary out of our joint accounts this morning," Jamal informed her. "I officially canceled your supplementary credit cards, and I filed the preliminary separation paperwork an hour ago. You are entirely cut off. Find somewhere else to sleep tonight because I am keeping the house." Penelope shrieked a wild, panicked sound that echoed through the hallways. She realized her husband was not bluffing. Her primary source of unlimited funding was permanently severed. Knowing she had absolutely no money to her name, she grabbed her designer bag and sprinted out the door, driving recklessly straight to the only people who consistently bailed her out of trouble. Howard and Beverly were sitting in their lavish living room when Penelope burst through the front door sobbing hysterically. Beverly was holding a cold compress to her wrist, still nursing her bruised ego from being physically dragged out of my corporate lobby by security guards. Penelope collapsed onto their large velvet sofa, frantically explaining that Jamal had discovered the secret debt and frozen her out completely. "I clearly need $50,000 immediately," Penelope wailed, gripping her father's arm. "If I do not pay Allison back right now, Jamal will finalize the divorce and expose me to everyone in our social circle. I will be completely ruined. You have to give me the money." Howard rubbed his temples, feeling his blood pressure spiking dangerously. The family was facing a massive, unprecedented crisis. They could not afford the public embarrassment of a high-profile divorce involving financial fraud. To protect their golden image, Howard had absolutely no choice. He slowly logged into his primary retirement portfolio, absorbing a massive early withdrawal penalty, and initiated a devastating liquidation of his liquid cash reserves to cover his daughter's catastrophic mistake. The massive financial hemorrhage drained the parents' safety net almost entirely. They sacrificed their hard-earned stability simply to maintain the illusion of their perfect family. Just as Howard confirmed the massive transfer to save Penelope, his cell phone rang loudly. It was Spencer. Spencer was standing in the parking lot of the furniture showroom, shivering in the cold air, while Madison cried in the passenger seat of his leased Porsche. He was completely desperate. His accounts were frozen by my ex parte restraining order, and he faced a tripled rent payment that was due by the end of the business day. If he failed to pay, the property management company would initiate an immediate eviction, leaving him and his pregnant mistress completely homeless. "Dad, I need a massive favor right now," Spencer pleaded, pacing aggressively across the asphalt. Allison completely blindsided me. She froze my accounts using some legal loophole. "I need you to wire me $20,000 immediately to cover emergency rent and buy some basic furniture. I will pay you back the second my accounts unlock." Howard stood looking at his weeping daughter and his exhausted wife. He looked down at his tablet, which displayed a dangerously low balance in his decimated retirement account. He simply did not have the funds to save his golden boy. "I cannot do it," Spencer Howard said. "Penelope needed an emergency bailout today. We just drained our liquid accounts to stop her husband from divorcing her. We literally have nothing left to give you." Spencer instantly stopped pacing. "What exactly do you mean you have nothing left?" he demanded. "I am going to be evicted by the end of the day. You have to help me." The line went completely dead. Howard had hung up the phone, leaving Spencer standing in the freezing parking lot of the luxury furniture showroom with his phone pressed uselessly against his ear. He stared at the blank screen, the horrific reality of his situation finally crushing the remaining breath from his lungs. His incredibly wealthy parents, his ultimate safety net for his entire privileged life, had absolutely nothing left to give him. He was completely on his own. He walked back to the Porsche where Madison was waiting impatiently. She rubbed her arms, complaining about the cold interior, and asked how quickly the delivery men could bring the imported Italian sectional they picked out. Spencer gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning stark white. He swallowed his massive pride and lied through his teeth, telling her the credit card machines were completely down due to a massive network failure across the city. He claimed they would simply have to stay in the house tonight and sort out the furniture delivery tomorrow morning. Madison frowned, her annoyance highly visible, but she begrudgingly agreed. Spencer drove them to a cheap big box discount store on the edge of town. He used the very last crumpled $100 bills he had hidden in his wallet to purchase a basic queen-sized plastic air mattress and a single cheap fleece blanket. Madison stared at the flimsy cardboard box in his hands with utter disgust. This was absolutely not the glamorous life of high society privilege she had eagerly signed up for when she decided to sleep with her wealthy boss. They returned to the dark, echoing house just as the winter temperatures plummeted below freezing. Because I had officially terminated the utility accounts in my name, the central heating system remained completely deactivated. Spencer spent 20 humiliating minutes loudly using a foot pump to inflate the cheap air mattress in the center of the massive, empty master bedroom. The harsh, glaring light from the cheap incandescent bulb I had installed cast long, depressing shadows against the bare drywall. Madison sat awkwardly on the edge of the plastic mattress, shivering violently under the fleece blanket. Her glamorous designer maternity clothes looked entirely ridiculous in the desolate freezing room. The romantic illusion she held of stealing a successful rich husband from his boring wife completely shattered into pieces right there on the cold hardwood floor. She looked around the empty space, her mind rapidly processing the bleak reality. Spencer was entirely broke. His accounts were completely frozen. His family could not bail him out. He could not even afford a basic hotel room, let alone the lavish lifestyle he had consistently promised to provide for her and the baby. The air mattress slowly began to deflate around 2 in the morning, sinking them both closer to the freezing floorboards. Madison lay awake, her teeth chattering loudly, staring at the bare ceiling. The glamorous affair was officially dead, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated misery of dating a man who possessed absolutely zero actual capital. When the harsh morning sunlight finally pierced through the bare windows, Madison abruptly stood up from the sunken plastic mattress. She did not bother to fix her hair or apply her flawless makeup. She zipped up her designer coat, grabbed her expensive handbag, and glared down at Spencer, who was still rubbing his sore back on the floor. Her sweet, admiring facade completely vanished, replaced by cold, calculated fury. I did not ruin my own reputation at the firm to sleep on a deflating piece of plastic in a freezing empty room, she hissed, her voice echoing loudly down the barren hallway. You promised me absolute luxury, Spencer. You promised me a perfect nursery, unlimited shopping budgets, and a stress-free pregnancy. You are entirely broke. Your wife took everything, and your family is completely useless. Spencer scrambled to his feet, his ego heavily bruised by her sharp, accurate words. He desperately tried to reach for her arm, deploying his usual smooth sales pitch. Madison, baby, please calm down. This is just a temporary legal hold. Allison is playing dirty, but I am going to fix this. My lawyers will crush her. I just need a few days to sort out the accounts. Madison slapped his hand away aggressively. You have exactly 24 hours to fix this massive disaster, she demanded, pointing a sharp, manicured finger directly at his chest. I am going to stay at a hotel downtown. You figure out how to pay for it, or I am blocking your number and leaving you permanently. I am not raising a child in poverty. Do not call me until you have actual cash in your hand. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the house, the heavy wooden front door slamming shut behind her with a thunderous bang. Spencer stood entirely alone in the freezing hollow house. His pride was absolutely decimated. The woman he had blown up his 5-year marriage for had just brutally rejected him the exact second his wallet ran dry. His desperation immediately transformed into pure, arrogant rage. In his highly narcissistic mind, none of this was his own fault. He completely blamed me for his public humiliation, for his frozen accounts, and for Madison walking out on him. He genuinely believed that because I possessed the higher earning potential as a forensic accountant, he could actively use the legal system to force me to fund his new lifestyle. Spencer grabbed his phone and dialed his high-priced divorce attorney. He loudly demanded an emergency legal mediation session to be scheduled immediately. He intended to ruthlessly bully me into paying him exorbitant spousal support, claiming he needed emergency funds to furnish his life and maintain his standard of living. He believed he could intimidate me in a formal legal setting, utterly unaware that I was already sitting in my corporate office holding the golden ticket that would send him directly to federal prison. The emergency legal mediation was scheduled for Wednesday morning at 10. The conference room was designed to intimidate. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a mahogany table polished to a mirror finish, and heavy leather chairs. I arrived 20 minutes early with my attorney Marcus, a sharp man, who operated with the exact lethal precision I applied to my financial audits, and we were fully prepared for the battle ahead. We sat quietly on one side of the expansive table. My leather briefcase rested near my feet, containing the heavily encrypted digital files that were about to decimate the arrogant man walking through the doors. Spencer made his grand entrance at 5 minutes past the hour, deliberately making us wait. He strutted into the conference room with a smug smile, acting as if the freezing empty house and his frozen bank accounts were minor inconveniences he was about to effortlessly swat away. Madison clung tightly to his arm, wearing a beige cashmere dress selected to accentuate her baby bump. She kept placing her hand over her stomach, scanning the room with theatrical eyes to play the innocent victim. Right behind them marched my former in-laws, Howard and Beverly. Despite having just drained their retirement portfolio to save their daughter Penelope from a humiliating divorce, they still walked with their heads held high. They pulled out chairs opposite us, glaring at me with raw hatred. They were entirely broke, drowning in their financial hemorrhage, yet they believed they could bulldoze me into submission. Spencer leaned back in his heavy leather chair, steepling his fingers together. He looked across the table at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious confidence. He truly believed this formal legal setting would terrify me. He assumed having his aggressive parents flanking him would trigger my old habit of keeping the peace. He had no idea I was studying him like a volatile liability on a balance sheet, waiting for the perfect moment to liquidate his entire existence. The appointed legal mediator, an older, stern-looking judge, took his seat at the head of the table and formally opened the emergency session. Spencer nodded to his high-priced attorney, a slick man named Donald, who cleared his throat and launched into a highly rehearsed opening statement. Donald stood up, placing his hands firmly on the polished wood. We requested this emergency mediation today to address the highly erratic, vindictive, and illegal behavior of my client's estranged wife. He began, his voice booming across the room. 2 days ago, while my client was away on a brief trip, Allison orchestrated a malicious raid on the marital residence. She unlawfully stripped the property of hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of vital domestic assets, rendering the home uninhabitable. This was a calculated act of petty vengeance designed to inflict maximum emotional distress on my client and his expectant partner. Madison dramatically dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue, letting out a soft sniffle. Beverly reached over and patted Madison on the shoulder, shooting me a venomous glare. Howard aggressively crossed his arms, nodding firmly at the lawyer's ridiculous words. Because of this unstable behavior, Donald continued, shifting his aggressive gaze directly toward me. We are bringing forth two non-negotiable demands. First, we require a legally binding court order compelling the absolute return of all stolen furniture, appliances, and fixtures to the property by tomorrow afternoon. If the items cannot be returned in pristine condition, we demand a direct wire transfer of $150,000 to cover replacement costs. My client has a legal right to enjoy the home he secured, and we will not allow a jealous ex-wife to disrupt his living environment. Donald paused, allowing his ridiculous demands to hang heavily in the tense air of the conference room. Marcus sat perfectly still beside me, his face a mask of absolute professional indifference. I did not flinch. I kept my hands folded neatly on my lap. Second, Donald said, raising his voice to emphasize his next point, we are officially petitioning for immediate, substantial spousal support. A thorough review of the financial disclosures indicates that Allison, functioning as a senior forensic accountant, currently holds a significantly higher and far more stable base income than my client. Given the extreme emotional distress Allison has intentionally caused, and considering the high-risk nature of Madison's current pregnancy, due to this stress, my client requires immediate financial assistance to furnish his life and maintain his established standard of living. We are seeking $8,000 a month in temporary alimony, effective immediately. Spencer smirked openly, immensely satisfied with the vicious picture his lawyer had painted. "You brought this entirely on yourself, Allison," Spencer stated, his tone dripping with condescending arrogance. "You thought you could throw a tantrum and steal my things just because you are bitter. Now you are going to pay for my new furniture, and you are going to subsidize my new family every single month. You are going to write me a check, or my legal team will destroy your professional reputation in open court." The sheer magnitude of his delusion was genuinely breathtaking. He was broke, heavily indebted to dangerous underground lenders, entirely locked out of his frozen accounts, and actively embezzling millions of dollars from his elderly clients. Yet he sat there flanked by his bankrupt parents and his gold-digging mistress, loudly demanding that I finance his illusions. I turned my head slightly and exchanged a brief knowing glance with Marcus. We had anticipated this exact level of aggressive entitlement. We knew Spencer would try to use the lease and his false sense of ownership as a weapon. I slowly uncrossed my legs under the table, sitting up perfectly straight in my chair. The trap was now fully set, the bait had been taken, and it was finally time to let Spencer dig his own inescapable legal grave right here on the official mediation record today. The suffocating silence stretched across the polished mahogany table for a full minute. I did not move. I did not blink. I simply maintained my steady gaze on Spencer, watching the initial wave of smug triumph slowly morph into a flicker of deep unease. He was waiting for my usual reaction. He wanted the tears, the apologies, the desperate scrambling to fix his mess. When none of that materialized, the heavy quiet of the conference room began to actively work against him. My attorney Warren finally broke the absolute stillness. He slowly opened a sleek leather folder, withdrawing a single sheet of paper with deliberate, agonizing precision. He placed the paper face down on the table before looking directly at Spencer's high-priced lawyer. "Donald, your demands for immediate spousal support and the forceful return of all domestic assets are certainly aggressive," Warren said, his voice entirely devoid of any intimidation. "However, before we address these financial ultimatums, my client and I need to fully understand the exact nature of your client's current living situation. You claim Allison illegally disrupted his secured environment. We require absolute clarification on that specific point." Spencer leaned forward, aggressively invading the space over the table. His chest puffed out as he eagerly seized the opportunity to boast about his supposed strategic brilliance. "I will clarify it for you right now," Spencer snapped, pointing a finger at Warren. "I secured the marital home. While Allison was busy packing her bags, I went straight to the property management company, Aegis Holdings, LLC. I terminated our joint month-to-month rental agreement and signed a brand new ironclad exclusive long-term lease. My name is the only name on that document. I am the sole legal tenant of that property. Allison has absolutely no right to step foot on that land, let alone hire a team of movers to strip the place down to the drywall. I secured the house for my growing family, and she threw a massive tantrum because she lost." Madison nodded enthusiastically, rubbing her cashmere-covered stomach to draw attention to her pregnancy. Spencer completely outsmarted her. She chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial innocence. "We have a legally binding contract with Aegis Holdings. They are a massive corporate entity, and they recognize Spencer as the sole provider. Allison stealing our furniture was just a pathetic attempt to ruin our happiness because she knows she legally lost her home." Howard and Beverly murmured their loud approval from the sidelines. Beverly crossed her arms and glared at me. "A real woman would accept defeat gracefully," Beverly muttered. "Spencer protected his assets like a real man should. You have no legal standing to harass him anymore." Warren ignored the gallery of toxic in-laws. He kept his attention entirely locked on Spencer. He turned slightly toward the mediator sitting at the head of the table. "Your Honor," Warren requested politely, "I want to ensure that every single word of my next exchange with the opposing party is fully documented on the official legal record." The mediator gave a swift nod, instructing the court reporter to note the interaction carefully. Warren turned back to face Spencer, his expression turning sharp and incredibly focused. Let us be absolutely clear for the official court record, Spencer Warren stated. You are boldly claiming that you hold an exclusive lease agreement with Aegis Holdings, LLC. Is that correct? Absolutely, Spencer replied with a massive, arrogant smirk. Signed and fully executed. I have the digital copies right here on my phone if you need me to prove it to you. Warren held up a hand, declining the offer. That will not be necessary. I simply need you to confirm your exact legal relationship with this specific corporate entity. You acknowledge on the record that Aegis Holdings LLC is the absolute sole legal owner of the property in question. Yes, Spencer answered instantly, rolling his eyes at what he thought was a stupid question. They own the property. I pay them the rent. It is a very simple concept. I know Allison struggles to understand basic business transactions, but surely a high-paid lawyer like you can grasp how a landlord and tenant relationship works. I pay Aegis Holdings, and they provide me with a house. End of story. And you fully recognize that as a tenant, you are entirely bound by the specific terms, conditions, and penalty clauses outlined in the lease agreement provided by Aegis Holdings, LLC. Warren pressed further, his voice remaining totally flat. You acknowledge their absolute authority over that residence. Spencer let out a loud, mocking laugh. His ego was blinding him to the massive pit opening up directly beneath his expensive leather shoes. Of course I acknowledge their authority, Spencer boasted loudly. They are a multi-million-dollar real estate firm. They set the rules and I follow them. I am a premier wealth manager. I understand corporate contracts better than anyone else in this room. I signed their lease. I agreed to their terms, and I recognize them as the sole owners of my home. Now, unless you have any more painfully obvious questions about how a rental property operates, I suggest we get back to the actual money you owe me. I want a check for my missing furniture, and I want my temporary alimony approved today. I sat perfectly still, listening to him dig his legal grave with astonishing speed. He had voluntarily surrendered every possible defense he might have used. He publicly validated the lease, confirmed the penalty clauses, and affirmed the absolute authority of the landlord on a certified legal record. His profound arrogance had blinded him to the imminent danger. The trap was completely sealed, and the absolute destruction of his reality was only seconds away. I slowly uncrossed my legs beneath the massive table, taking a deep breath of the overly air-conditioned air, and prepared myself to finally deliver the ultimate devastating and absolutely fatal legal blow. I reached down to the floor and picked up my slim leather briefcase. The rhythmic clicking of the court reporter's keyboard was the only sound in the tense room. I snapped the brass latches open and extracted a thick manila folder. It was heavy with certified state records, bank transfers, and irrefutable property deeds. I placed it squarely on the polished mahogany wood and slid it firmly across the long table. It stopped perfectly right in front of Spencer's crossed arms. Go ahead, I instructed, keeping my tone completely flat and professional. Read it aloud for the official record, since you understand corporate contracts better than anyone else in this room. Spencer let out a loud, theatrical sigh, rolling his eyes, as if I were handing him a meaningless grocery receipt. He casually flipped open the heavy cover. His eyes scanned the bold black text printed on the very first page. It was the official state certification of incorporation for Aegis Holdings, LLC. He saw the corporate seal. He saw the registration dates. And then his gaze hit the single line identifying the sole managing member and absolute owner of the entire corporate entity. All color instantly vanished from his face. His smug, arrogant smirk completely dissolved, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. His mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. He just stared blindly at my printed name, physically unable to process the catastrophic reality staring back at him. Madison leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowing as she tried to read the dense legal jargon. What is it? Spencer, she asked, her voice tight with sudden panic. What does that paper say? I did not wait for him to find his voice. I looked Spencer dead in the eye and delivered the exact truth he never bothered to uncover. Aegis Holdings, LLC is my company, Spencer, I stated clearly, ensuring the court reporter captured every single syllable. I founded it exactly 1 month before our wedding. I used the substantial premarital inheritance my late grandmother left me to purchase the property completely in cash under the corporate name. You never owned that house. You never rented from a mysterious millionaire landlord. For the past 5 years, every single month, you eagerly wired your massive rent payment directly into my private corporate account. You essentially paid me to live in my own house, and you funded my investment portfolio with your arrogance. The silence in the mediation room became utterly deafening. Howard and Beverly sat completely frozen in their heavy leather chairs. The realization struck them like a physical blow. The boring bookkeeper they had relentlessly mocked and belittled for half a decade was actually their son's incredibly wealthy landlord. They had sat at my dining table eating food I paid for in a house I entirely owned while treating me like a disposable servant. That is impossible, Donald Spencer's highly paid lawyer stammered, pulling the file toward himself with shaking hands. He rapidly flipped through the certified deeds, the bank routing confirmations, and the state tax records. His face flushed a deep embarrassed red as he realized his client had actively marched them directly into a devastating, unwinnable trap. It is entirely legal, Warren countered, folding his hands resting calmly on the table. Aegis Holdings, LLC, is a distinctly separate corporate entity formed with strictly non-marital assets prior to the marriage. Spencer willfully signed legally binding lease agreements with this corporation. He voluntarily deposited rent payments. He completely relinquished any marital claim to the equity of the home by establishing a formal tenant and landlord relationship. He just proudly affirmed this exact arrangement on the official legal record 5 minutes ago. Spencer looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and realized gravity was real. His hands began to visibly tremble violently, shaking the polished table surface as he gripped the edge extremely tightly. He had constructed his entire identity around being the superior intellect in our marriage, treating my career as a completely meaningless afterthought. His breathing turned incredibly shallow and frantic. He stared at me with wide, panicked eyes, the absolute destruction of his massive ego tearing him apart from the inside out. "You tricked me," he gasped, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "You lied to me for 5 whole years. I never lied," I responded with chilling clarity. "You simply never asked. You were far too obsessed with your luxury cars and your tailored suits to actually engage with my career. You assumed my forensic accounting degree was a joke. You handed me your money because it made you feel powerful to be the sole provider on paper. I just facilitated your massive delusion." Madison suddenly jumped up from her chair, grabbing Spencer's expensive suit jacket and shaking him violently. "You told me you owned that house," she screamed, completely abandoning her sweet, innocent act. "You told me we were rich. You told me the rent was just a tax write-off. We have absolutely nothing. We are sleeping on a deflating piece of plastic." I calmly reached back into my briefcase and pulled out one final single sheet of bright white paper. I slid it across the table until it rested directly on top of the incorporation documents. Spencer looked down at it, his eyes completely bloodshot. "Since you failed to pay the newly tripled rent yesterday afternoon," I explained softly, my voice cutting through Madison's loud echoing hysterics. Aegis Holdings, LLC, is exercising its absolute legal right to terminate your tenancy. That is your official 3-day eviction notice. If you and your unauthorized guest are not physically removed from my property, by Friday morning law enforcement will violently drag you out onto the street. You wanted total control over my life, but you forgot that I control the ground beneath your feet. I will enjoy renovating that space once you are entirely gone. You demanded I pack my bags. Now it is your turn. Goodbye." Madison snatched the eviction notice from the polished mahogany table, her eyes darting frantically across the bold black text. The thick paper shook violently in her manicured hands. The facade of the innocent glowing mother completely shattered, replaced by the raw terror of a woman realizing she had traded her youth and career for a man with zero actual capital. "You lied to me!" she shrieked, slamming the paper directly into Spencer's chest. "You promised me a luxury nursery. You promised me international vacations and a massive trust fund for the baby. You are literally getting evicted from a house you do not even own. You are completely broke." Spencer flinched instinctively, raising his hands to placate her. "Madison, please keep your voice down," he begged, glancing nervously at the mediator and his own defeated lawyer. "This is just a temporary setback. I am a senior wealth manager. I make excellent money. We will just rent a luxury penthouse downtown until I completely destroy her in court and get my equity back." Warren. My attorney leaned back in his leather chair and let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "There is absolutely no equity for you to retrieve, Spencer," he stated clearly. "You signed a standard residential lease with a corporate entity. You paid monthly rent for a service provided. You have zero legal claim to a single brick of that property, and your own signed statements on the official court record today entirely prevent you from ever arguing otherwise. You handed over your only leverage entirely on your own." Donald Spencer's highly paid attorney forcefully closed his briefcase. He refused to look at his client. The sheer professional embarrassment of being led into a legally fatal trap by an arrogant client was radiating off him. Donald stood up, smoothed his expensive suit jacket, and addressed the mediator. "Your Honor, in light of these new, fully verified corporate documents and my client's own recorded statements confirming his tenant status, the petitions for spousal support and asset retrieval are formally withdrawn. We have no legal standing to pursue those specific demands." Spencer stared at his lawyer in absolute disbelief. "Donald, you cannot just quit. I pay you a massive retainer to fight for me. You have to force her to pay me alimony. She makes more money than I do." Donald did not even pause his stride toward the heavy glass doors. "You cannot squeeze blood from a stone, Spencer. You lied to me about your asset ownership. Good luck with the eviction." Donald exited the conference room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him with a profound sense of finality. The absolute reality of the situation finally registered on Howard's and Beverly's faces. Their golden boy, the incredibly successful wealth manager they constantly bragged about at their elite country club, was about to be thrown out onto the freezing street. He had absolutely no savings, his accounts were frozen by a legal restraining order, and he owned zero domestic assets. Even worse, Howard and Beverly knew they possessed absolutely zero liquid cash to bail him out. They had completely drained their retirement portfolios just 24 hours ago to save their daughter Penelope from her own catastrophic financial divorce. The entire family was financially suffocating. Beverly stood up from her heavy leather chair. Her aggressive, entitled posture from the office lobby had completely vanished. She suddenly looked incredibly small, frail, and desperately panicked. She walked slowly around the large mahogany table, stopping a few feet away from my chair. She forced a strained, trembling smile onto her face, attempting to project the warm, loving mother-in-law persona she had never actually possessed. "Allison, sweetheart," Beverly began, her voice quivering with manufactured affection. "Let us all just take a deep breath and calm down. We are all family here. Families have arguments, and sometimes things get entirely out of hand. But we do not throw each other out into the cold winter air. Spencer made a terrible mistake with this young girl, but he is still your husband. You two built a life together. You cannot truly want to see the father of your future children completely ruined like this." Howard quickly stepped up beside his wife, nodding his head vigorously. "Beverly is absolutely right, Allison," he added, deploying his most persuasive paternal tone. "We know you are hurt, and you have every right to be angry with him. But kicking him out of the house is simply going too far. Let us dismiss this eviction notice today. We can sit down like reasonable adults, discuss a fair financial separation, and handle this entire mess privately. We have always thought of you as our own daughter. We know you have a good heart. You do not want to destroy him." I slowly stood up from my chair. I looked at Howard, then turned my gaze directly onto Beverly. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy pouring from their mouths was staggering. I picked up my leather briefcase, securing the brass latches with a loud, definitive snap. "Do not ever insult my intelligence by calling me your daughter," I stated, my voice echoing coldly across the silent room. You spent 5 years treating my career like a pathetic joke. You gladly sat at my dining table eating food I paid for while mocking my lack of ambition. And when you discovered your son was actively replacing me with his 26-year-old assistant, you did not offer me a single ounce of sympathy. You fully supported him. Beverly reached out her hands, shaking as she tried to grasp my arm. Allison, please, we were just trying to support our son. We did not know the house belonged to your company. I stepped back, ensuring she could not touch me. 3 days ago, you proudly marched directly into my corporate office lobby. I reminded her, my words striking her like physical blows. You deliberately slapped my face. I will never forget that moment of betrayal. Beverly physically recoiled. She stumbled backward toward Howard, burying her face in her trembling hands. They realized their aggressive intimidation tactics had completely backfired. They brought a knife to a gunfight, and they were out of ammunition. Spencer pushed past his weeping mother and slammed his heavy hands down onto the polished mahogany table. He glared directly at me, his chest heaving with angry exertion. "Fine," Spencer shouted, his voice echoing. "You win the house, Allison. You keep your corporate entity and empty rooms. I will rent a luxury penthouse downtown today and rebuild my perfect life without you. You think an eviction notice is going to destroy me? I am a senior wealth manager. I control millions of dollars in liquid assets. I will bounce back by next week, and you will spend the rest of your pathetic life balancing spreadsheets for local bakeries." I looked at him with chilling pity. He truly believed losing the house was the absolute worst consequence he would face today. He had no idea I was just clearing the battlefield for the lethal execution. "I am fully aware of how much money you control, Spencer," I replied, my voice calm. I reached into my leather briefcase. I pulled out a thick stack of documents bound together. It was the financial dossier I had constructed from the data on Jamal's USB drive. I lifted the stack of papers and dropped it squarely onto the center of the mahogany table. The massive thud echoed like a heavy gavel striking a wooden block. "What exactly is that?" Madison asked, her voice shaking violently as she stared blindly at the thick black binder. "That is the end of Spencer's existence," I stated. I turned my gaze onto my husband. "You spent 5 years mocking my career, Spencer. You told your friends I was just a boring bookkeeper. You failed to understand what a forensic accountant does. My profession revolves around hunting down hidden money, exposing corporate fraud, and dismantling financial lies. And your digital security was amateur." Spencer's face transitioned rapidly from flushed red to a horrifying shade of pale gray. His eyes locked onto the black binder. He instantly recognized the specific financial logo printed boldly on the top page. It was the internal audit header for his own wealth management firm. "You left a hidden folder on your shared family cloud drive," I explained, watching his knees begin to buckle. Jamal stumbled across it while looking for his tax returns. He handed me the data on Saturday. "I spent my weekend auditing your secret life. I found the unexplained withdrawals from your corporate accounts. I traced the wire transfers you pushed into offshore holding companies in the Cayman Islands. I cataloged the digital receipts for your gambling platforms." Howard stepped forward, looking utterly confused and deeply terrified. "Spencer? What is she talking about right now? What massive gambling debts?" I did not let Spencer answer his father. I kept my eyes locked on my husband. "If it were just your own money you were burning through, Spencer, I would walk away and let you drown in debt. But you are broke. You have been underwater for over a year. So you decided to fund your gambling addiction using other people's money." I traced a line of stolen capital moving from the retirement accounts of your elderly investors directly into a shell company you registered in Delaware. The legal mediator sitting at the head of the table suddenly sat up completely straight, his eyes widening in absolute shock. This was no longer a messy divorce mediation. He was actively witnessing the live exposure of a massive federal crime. "You forged your client's signatures on authorization forms?" I continued, my voice sharp and relentless. "You fabricated their quarterly return statements to hide the missing capital. Every time you suffered a loss playing underground poker, another elderly client's pension mysteriously dropped in value. But you did not just steal to cover your gambling losses." I turned my steady gaze toward Madison. She was physically backing away from Spencer, looking directly at him like he was a highly dangerous monster. "You also stole to fund your pathetic affair," I told her. "I found the receipts for your diamond earrings, your hotel suites, and your first-class flights to Europe." Spencer purchased every single one of those gifts using money he actively embezzled from retired teachers and nurses. He bought your blind loyalty with stolen pension funds. Madison let out a horrified gasp, tightly covering her pale mouth with her trembling hands. She finally realized she was deeply implicated as a direct recipient of stolen federal assets. Spencer collapsed heavily into his leather chair. He gripped his hair with both hands, pulling extremely hard. "Allison, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "I can fix this. I can move the money back. I will pay you whatever you want in the divorce. Just give me that folder. We can keep this completely quiet. I will sign anything you ask for right now." I looked down at the arrogant man who had ordered me out of my own home just 5 short days ago. "You still do not understand the absolute gravity of your situation, Spencer," I said coldly. "I did not bring this massive dossier here to negotiate a better divorce settlement. I brought it here as a courtesy notification. Before I walked into this law office this morning, I sent fully encrypted digital copies of this entire binder to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the board of directors at your firm. Federal agents are already reviewing your crimes. You are going to federal prison." Madison scrambled backward, her chair screeching loudly across the polished floor. The absolute reality of my words slammed into her carefully curated illusions. She looked at Spencer, completely paralyzed by his impending destruction. He was no longer a successful wealth manager who could buy her diamonds. He was an exposed fraud, entirely bankrupt and facing decades behind bars. "I am not going down for your criminal mistakes," Madison screamed. She gathered her designer purse, scanning the room for a quick exit. Spencer weakly reached out his hand, desperately trying to grab her wrist to stop her from leaving. "Madison, baby, please wait," Spencer pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob. "We can figure this out. I need you right now." She violently yanked her arm away from his grasp. With a swift, incredibly calculated motion, she unclasped the $30,000 vintage luxury timepiece he was so immensely proud of, slipping the heavy gold band directly into her designer coat pocket. She was not walking away empty-handed. "You lied to me about everything," Madison spat, glaring down at him with pure disgust. "Have fun in federal prison, Spencer. Do not ever contact me again." She spun on her designer heels and sprinted out of the mediation room, abandoning him completely. The heavy glass doors slammed shut behind her, finalizing her swift departure. Howard began to hyperventilate, realizing his family name was about to be dragged through a highly publicized federal criminal trial. Beverly wept openly, her theatrical sobs ignored by everyone present as they watched the young woman their son blew up his marriage for eagerly rob him and run. The silence in the room returned thicker and far more suffocating than before. I picked up my briefcase, gave the stunned mediator a polite nod, and walked out alongside my attorney. The execution was absolutely complete. The next 48 hours were a chaotic blur of inevitable consequences. While I returned to my corporate office and continued my daily routine, Spencer remained trapped inside the freezing, completely hollow shell of my property. His bank accounts remained securely frozen by the family court order. His access to his corporate email was immediately suspended the moment the board of directors received my comprehensive financial dossier. He possessed no liquid cash to buy a plane ticket, and his ruined parents were entirely incapable of bailing him out. He spent 2 agonizing days sitting alone on a deflating plastic air mattress, waiting in pure terror for the inevitable knock on his door. He survived solely on tap water and stale crackers found buried in the back of his leased vehicle. Friday morning arrived with clear, crisp sunlight. It was the exact day his 3-day eviction notice officially expired. I sat comfortably at my desk downtown, completely aware of the timeline unfolding across the city. At precisely 8 in the morning, a locksmith contracted by Aegis Holdings LLC pulled his commercial van into the suburban driveway to officially secure the premises and change the basic aluminum locks. But the locksmith did not arrive alone. Three dark unmarked sports utility vehicles aggressively turned onto the quiet street, forming a tight barricade directly behind Spencer's leased Porsche. Six federal agents wearing tactical jackets stepped out onto the concrete. They moved with swift precision, completely ignoring the bewildered locksmith standing on the porch. The lead agent pounded heavily on the wooden front door, his fist echoing loudly in the quiet neighborhood. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," he commanded. "Open the door immediately." Spencer slowly unlocked the cheap deadbolt, looking completely disheveled, utterly exhausted, and entirely defeated. He had spent his entire life projecting an image of untouchable wealth and superior intellect. Now he stood shivering in wrinkled clothes, facing the absolute destruction of his fraudulent empire. The agents did not hesitate. They grabbed his arms, spinning him around and slamming him firmly against the exterior wall of the house. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed sharply in the crisp morning air. They read him his Miranda rights loudly and clearly, listing the massive federal charges of wire fraud, grand larceny, and corporate embezzlement. The commotion instantly drew the attention of the entire affluent neighborhood. Neighbors stepped out onto their manicured lawns, clutching their morning coffee mugs, watching in absolute shock as the neighborhood golden boy was aggressively walked across his own driveway. Mrs. Peterson, the neighborhood gossip, stood frozen on her porch, her jaw practically hitting the floorboards as she watched the federal authorities catalog his seized luxury vehicle for asset forfeiture. The same neighbors Spencer used to brag to about his massive bonuses and luxury vacations were now actively witnessing his spectacular, humiliating downfall. The federal agents aggressively pushed Spencer into the back of the dark vehicle. As they secured him inside the property, management locksmith calmly stepped forward, completely ignoring the criminal arrest, and began unscrewing the front door lock. The locksmith calmly replaced the cheap aluminum deadbolt with a brand new high-security electronic keypad, fully restoring my absolute dominion over the property. Spencer was forced to watch through the tinted glass window of the federal vehicle as he was simultaneously arrested for massive corporate fraud and legally evicted from his own home. His entire reality vaporized in a matter of seconds. His highly lucrative career was permanently destroyed. His arrogant reputation was entirely shattered. His freedom was officially stripped away. The dark vehicles pulled out of the driveway, speeding down the suburban street toward the federal holding facility downtown. The house stood completely empty once again, perfectly secured by the new locks, entirely free of the toxic man who had tried to steal it. The dramatic neighborhood spectacle concluded, leaving behind a profound, deeply satisfying silence. He had aggressively demanded I pack my things and leave. Instead, I remained completely untouched, absolutely victorious and finally free. Finally, the federal raid concluded before noon, leaving a profound silence over the affluent suburban street. I remained securely seated at my office desk downtown, finalizing the final audit reports for my corporate clients. My personal cell phone began vibrating aggressively across the glass surface. The caller identification boldly displayed Howard's name. Under any normal circumstance, I would have forwarded the frantic call directly to voicemail. I knew exactly why my former father-in-law was desperately reaching out to me. I calmly picked up the device, pressed the green button, and held the phone to my ear. I did not offer a polite greeting or a comforting word. I simply waited in absolute silence, listening to the chaotic, hyperventilating sounds radiating from the other side of the digital connection. Beverly was sobbing wildly in the background, her theatrical wails completely stripped of their usual arrogant performance. Allison Howard pleaded, his voice shaking with a level of raw panic I had never heard from him before. "Thank God you actually answered the phone. We are completely trapped in an absolute nightmare right now." Federal agents just arrested Spencer. They dragged him out of the house in handcuffs. The authorities are holding him in a federal detention facility downtown, and the judge set his bail at an astronomical $2 million. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, keeping my breathing perfectly steady. "I am fully aware of his current legal situation, Howard," I stated coldly. I am the forensic accountant who personally provided the federal investigators with the comprehensive financial dossier detailing his massive corporate embezzlement. A sharp, stunned gasp echoed over the line, followed by Beverly's frantic weeping intensifying. Howard struggled to find his breath, the horrifying reality of my absolute retaliation finally crushing his fragile ego. Allison, please, Howard begged, completely abandoning his usual toxic superiority. You cannot simply let him sit in a federal prison cell. You know his accounts are entirely frozen because of your divorce filing. We desperately tried to pay the 10% cash bond to secure his immediate release, but our bank accounts are completely empty. Penelope drained our entire retirement portfolio yesterday to save her own marriage from absolute ruin. We literally have zero liquid capital left to save our son. We are entirely broke. I felt a deep, profoundly satisfying wave of pure justice wash over me. The incredibly wealthy, status-obsessed family that had relentlessly mocked my career was now actively begging me for financial salvation. You need to wire $200,000 to the bail bondsman right now, Beverly screamed into the receiver, snatching the phone directly from her husband. You have the money, Allison. You own that massive corporate holding company. You cannot just leave him locked up like a common criminal. He is still your husband. He is the father of an unborn child. You have to think about the innocent baby Madison is carrying. He needs to be free to support his new family. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her frantic demand was genuinely breathtaking. She had marched into my corporate lobby just 3 days ago, physically slapped my face, and proudly called me a barren failure while loudly praising the pregnant mistress. Now she expected me to eagerly drain my hard-earned assets to purchase the freedom of the man who actively betrayed me, using that exact same mistress as an emotional bargaining chip. Madison completely abandoned your son the very second she realized his bank accounts were empty, I informed Beverly with surgical precision. She ran out of the legal mediation room, stole his $30,000 vintage watch, and explicitly told him never to contact her again. She absolutely refuses to raise a child in poverty. Your son has no money, no home, and no new family waiting for him. Beverly let out a loud, devastated wail, completely overwhelmed by the absolute collapse of her golden boy's perfect life. Howard quickly took the phone back, his voice dropping into a pathetic, desperate whisper. We are begging you, Allison, Howard pleaded. We will sign any legal document you want. We will publicly apologize for everything we ever said to you. Just pay the bail. You are a good, decent woman. You do not want to see him destroyed. Please have some mercy on us. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, actively remembering the countless Sunday dinners where Howard had loudly humiliated me. I remembered him demanding I return the furniture I bought with my own money. I remembered his cruel, dismissive words when I first started building my forensic accounting firm. He had looked at me with pure disgust and told me I was wasting Spencer's valuable time. I opened my eyes, staring sharply at the city skyline outside my office window. I do not have a single ounce of mercy left for anyone in your fraudulent family, I stated, my voice dropping to a chilling, definitive pitch. 5 years ago, when I briefly struggled to secure my first corporate client, you sat at my dining table and told Spencer he needed to evaluate his investments. You explicitly told him that my career was a pathetic joke. I remember your exact words, Howard. I have carried them with me every single day. Howard fell completely silent on the other end of the line, his breath catching in his throat as the dark memory resurfaced. Failures do not belong in my life, I said, perfectly mirroring the exact cruel phrase he had weaponized against me years ago. Your son is a massive, spectacular failure. He built his entire existence on stolen money and fragile lies. You enabled his toxic narcissism, and now you can watch him burn. Do not ever contact me again. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear. I deliberately hovered my finger over the bright red button. I completely severed the connection and permanently blocked their numbers. The absolute iron boundary was finally set in stone today. My home has been perfectly refurnished. I did not simply return the items I legally extracted on that freezing Saturday morning. I upgraded every single piece. A massive plush sectional now anchors the living room facing a beautiful stone fireplace that crackles with warmth. The vintage brass bar cart has returned to its rightful corner, fully stocked to celebrate my absolute freedom. Tonight, the dining room table is surrounded by the vibrant, joyful voices of people who genuinely respect and value my existence. I am hosting a celebratory dinner party, surrounding myself with the chosen family I cultivated after excising the toxic waste from my reality. Among the guests laughing loudly at the head of the table is Jamal. He looks like an entirely new man. The heavy exhaustion that used to permanently weigh down his shoulders during those miserable Sunday dinners with my former in-laws has completely vanished. After Jamal discovered the undeniable proof of Penelope's financial infidelity, he executed his own flawless exit strategy. He filed for divorce, legally protected his architectural firm, and completely severed his ties with the toxic family. Without his steady income to fund her lavish country club lifestyle, Penelope was forced to move back into the cramped, miserable apartment Howard and Beverly currently rent. Jamal is thriving. His business is expanding rapidly, and he has become one of my absolute closest friends. We often share a quiet, knowing smile across the room, silently acknowledging the spectacular synchronized implosion we both survived and orchestrated. The conversation around the dining table shifts naturally to our current professional victories, utterly devoid of the condescending mockery that used to define my marriage. I am running my forensic accounting firm with unprecedented success. The high-profile nature of my counterstrike against my corrupt ex-husband brought a massive influx of elite corporate clients to my door. They want the meticulous, ruthless accountant who dismantled a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme in a single weekend. I am operating at the absolute peak of my career, completely unbothered by the pathetic ghosts of my past. Those ghosts are currently facing the severe, crushing weight of federal justice. Spencer is not living in a luxury downtown penthouse. He is currently sitting in a stark, heavily guarded cell at the Federal Detention Center, awaiting his criminal trial. Because his parents completely drained their retirement accounts to save Penelope, they had absolutely zero capital to hire a private defense attorney. The former golden boy of the neighborhood is now entirely reliant on an overworked public defender to fight multiple federal charges of wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The Securities and Exchange Commission successfully recovered a significant portion of the stolen pension funds, completely liquidating Spencer's remaining assets to compensate his elderly victims. He faces a maximum sentence of 30 years in federal prison. His arrogant ego has been entirely crushed behind concrete walls and iron bars. As for Madison, she vanished into thin air the exact moment she realized the money was gone. She abandoned Spencer at the mediation table, stole his expensive vintage watch, and immediately fled the city. I heard through the legal grapevine that she relocated to another state, desperately searching for a new wealthy target to fund her delusions of grandeur. She learned a brutal lesson about the severe consequences of actively participating in the destruction of a marriage for sheer financial gain. The luxurious life she thought she had successfully stolen turned out to be an empty, freezing trap. Howard and Beverly are completely broke, ostracized from their social circles, and entirely consumed by the legal bills mounting from Spencer's federal indictment. They lost their pristine reputation and their comfortable retirement because they chose to enable a narcissist instead of demanding basic accountability. They gambled everything on their superiority, and the house always wins. I walk over to the dining table, raising my glass to toast the people sitting in my home. The sound of clinking crystal rings clearly through the warm, beautifully decorated room. I look around at the life I built entirely with my own hands, funded by my own intelligence, and protected by my own absolute boundaries. I did not beg for respect. I demanded justice. I refused to let a cheating man convince me that my career was a joke, or that my worth was defined by his presence. I step away from the table for a moment, walking toward the large bay windows overlooking the calm suburban street. The neighborhood is calm, peaceful, and serene. The chaos and trauma are permanently locked outside. I look directly into my own reflection in the dark glass, seeing a powerful, financially independent 33-year-old woman who successfully burned a fraudulent empire to the ground and built a fortress from the ashes. I reclaimed my peace, secured my fortune, and completely rewrote the narrative of my own life. Empty houses tell no lies, but women who know their worth know exactly how to take out the trash. Have you ever had to clean up a mess left behind by a betrayer? Share your story in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe.